Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Macon Campbell and this is maconSTUFF. So guys, it looks like we're finally in the home stretch. Getting this organ done now is about a week or two away, and I'm very excited to see this thing done. So in the last episode I went ahead and completely finished all the parts. I sanded them down, refinished them 3 times, and I'm very happy that I did. I was about this close to quitting after the second round of finish because I just felt like it was never going to end. But I'm glad that I pushed through because the finish that I have now I really think looks amazing. The worry that I had about a matte finish looking dull is totally gone now. The combination of the sanding between all the coats that I put on really brought this finish out nicely. After the final coat, following some advice that I got from a subscriber called Sergio, he recommended that I use a brown paper bag and rub down all the surfaces, and I must say that really smoothed the finish out well. I wish there was a thing like Feel-O-Vision so that you could feel what this finish feels like. It is super smooth and it looks, at least in my eyes, beautiful. And all in all, it's a lot better than I ever hoped to achieve. So with that being said, let's jump into this penultimate episode of the organ restoration, as there are a couple more minor things that I need to get done before I can jump into the final assembly of this organ. One of the main parts is going to be straightening out and leveling all the keys, which is something that I've been kind of worrying about, but we're just going to jump into it and see how it goes. But then there's one more thing that I've conveniently and consistently forgotten about, and it is this. So there are times throughout this restoration where I've seen this stool standing around, and I've just kind of constantly brushed it aside as something that I'll sort out later. And unfortunately now is later, so I'm going to have to jump into this thing and get it somewhat restored. So my plan here is going to be just to take as much of this apart as I can, and I'm going to take it straight back to Gerald, who did the blasting for me, so that he can blast off this finish, and the rest I'll do myself. Hi Gerald. Hi, it's Macon here. I just wanted to find out quickly if you have time to blast one more small part for me. Yeah, it's just a normal 3-legged stool. I'll take apart everything that needs to be taken apart, and then I'll just bring that to you. Okay, so you say tomorrow is better. Alright, well then it's not a problem, then I'll come around tomorrow and I'll drop these things off. Alright, thanks Gerald. Okay, bye. Okay, so he asked me if I could bring the stool around tomorrow morning, which I will do, and he has also just informed me that there is another fairly large piece of the organ that was left behind after blasting, which is shocking because I kind of thought everything was there. I'm pretty interested to see which part it is that's missing. So basically I'm not quite as done as I thought I was, so I'm going to have to get that part back and I'll have to do that finishing as well. I'll probably do that part off camera because it's pretty much the same as everything I've shown you already. So let's get started off by taking this stool apart. Okay, so it's pretty rough looking down here. It looks as if this thing may have been broken and repaired a number of times. This whole ring, which is the base of the cushion, is terribly warped, so I don't know if I'm going to fix that or if I'm just going to leave it as is. The wadding or whatever they used in here feels like straw, which is pretty hard, so I'll probably be replacing that with some kind of foam, something that's a bit more comfortable. So let's just take apart what we can and take it from there. That looks almost like tobacco. My goodness. This looks pretty horrible. At least now I know why it was so uncomfortable to sit on. Chuck that right in the bin. Looks like there's more of this stuff embedded on the inside of this, and also held on with even more nails. Crazy how many nails and tacks are in here. I don't know how much of this I'm going to be able to reuse, but I'm going to collect them all anyway. Well, that took quite a lot longer than I thought it would. As you can see, it literally looks like a minefield where all of these nails were knocked in. I'd say around a quarter of them broke off while I was trying to take them out. As you can probably see, there's a couple of them still stuck in there. I'll carry on and see how many of them I can still get out, but otherwise I think I'd call that pretty much done and ready for blasting. Okay, so I took all the wooden parts for the stool in this morning to get blasted, and I retrieved the part that was left behind. And this is it. I know, right? How on earth could I have been missing this part this whole time and not even noticed it? So I'm going to put this off to the side. I'm going to bring over the keys so I can get started on leveling and straightening them up. Okay, so there are a number of adjustments that need to be made to these keys, and this is how I'm going to approach it. So firstly, what I think I need to address is the level of each of the keys individually. As you can probably tell, some of them are not level. Now, as far as I can tell, how that needs to be adjusted is by adding a bend into these pins here. Now, I noticed that when I took these pins out and I cleaned them, that some of them did have some bends in them. And I took most of those bends out, which I now realize I probably shouldn't have done. I should have kept these pins in the correct order, as well as the bends that were put in them were probably put in there on purpose to horizontally level each one of the keys. Now, when it comes to the actual leveling of the keys, that, as you may recall, is as a result of me not taking all the pitmans out in the order that they were put in and storing them in order and putting them back in the same order. Leveling the keys requires you to either add more material on top of the pitman or file some material away to make the keys nice and level with one another. I've realized that there's quite a bit more adjustment that I'm going to have to make, as I've noticed quite a bit of inconsistency regarding the couplers. You may recall some of the pitmans on the bass and the treble side have got little collars glued onto them, which are activated by the couplers when it is enabled. If I activate the couplers, you'll see that some of the keys get pushed up. So quite a lot more still to go regarding this whole setup. So I think it's just best to get into it. I'm going to demonstrate on this first one over here just so you can see how I'm going to go about it. As you can see, this first one, it's a little bit rotated to the left. So what I'm going to do is I take the key out, I'll pull the pin, and then I have clamped up over here a piece of hard wood. This is camel thorn, very, very hard stuff. I've got a hole drilled over here that is the same depth as which the pin is sunk in here. So then all I do is insert it in there and give it a slight bend, and then I just make sure to insert it so that the bend goes in the direction in which I want it to. Put back the key, it should be straight, and it is. As you can see, it is a whole lot straighter now. I think I may have actually bent it over a little bit too much, but what I can do is just turn this slightly and that should straighten it out. So now I've just got to go ahead and follow the same procedure through all the rest of them. The next order of business is going to be leveling these keys. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to have to adjust the length of the pitmans underneath. So I think the best way to do that is just to take all of the keys off, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so I'm noticing quite a lot of inconsistency in the height of these pitmans, and that I'm guessing is as a result of someone doing adjustment to the height of them when they were in their original position. They are no longer in their original position, so that is why I'm having all of these leveling problems. So before I continue, I'd just like to say that this is most probably not the way to go about it, but what I'm going to do is I've taken this piece of scrap wood and I've glued on a piece of sandpaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand softly along them until they are all pretty much at the same height, and then I can work from there. So very important, what I don't want to happen is when I'm sanding these, for any of the sanding dust to get down here into the holes where the pitmans go through the reed pan. So what I've done is I've cut these pieces of scrap. I'm going to stick them in like this on either side. I've got another shorter piece over here. I'll stick it on this side. So when I'm sanding these pitmans down, that'll aid in collecting all of the dust here in the bottom, and then I'll come along with a vacuum cleaner and just suck that up before I move on to the next piece. So let's get to it. Okay, so I'm now pretty much 100% level across all of the pitmans. So what I'm going to do now is replace all of the keys just for a moment and see where we stand. Okay, so I wouldn't call that perfect, but it's a damn sight better than what it was, and for a 120-year-old instrument I think that is good enough. So the next order of business is going to be sorting out the couplers. As you can see by some of them, when I activate it, it's lifting up some of the keys over here. So I'm first going to take off all of these keys again, and then I'll explain to you how I'm going to go about adjusting them. Okay, so I've done a bit of adjustment to the base couplers already and they seem to be working okay. But let me try and explain to you how this works. So the coupler arm has got two ends which look very similar. It has the front part which comes up underneath the key, and then it has the rear part which rests on the collar of the pitman. Now because the collars on the pitman are not all at the exact same height, when you go to activate the coupler, the front parts which come up underneath the keys are also not at the same level. So the manufacturers of these organs came up with a way to adjust for that. So if you take any of the keys that need to activate couplers, you'll see that they have these little dowels screwed into the bottom of them, and by turning these screws clockwise or anti-clockwise you can either move them in or out, which basically is up or down, so that they can seat nicely at the top of the coupler. So basically what you need to do is you have to have some way to keep the keys flat at the back so that they don't jump up when you're trying to press the keys. So I just got a piece of scrap aluminium and I just held them down there, and I activate the coupler, and then I adjust that little dial so that the coupler will perform the task which it's supposed to, which is activate another note 1 octave down. So as you'll see here, if I lift this up, none of the keys are pushing up excessively, and if I press on each of these keys, the respective note is being activated. So as far as I'm concerned, the bass coupler side seems to be working fine. Now I just have to replicate it on the treble side, which has got almost 3 times as many couplers as the bass side. So I'm going to do that off camera as it's quite time consuming, and I'll check back when I'm done. Okay, so when I go to put this whole thing back together, I would like to put the entire action back in one piece. So that's everything from the reed pan all the way up to the stop action at the top. So to do that, I'm going to have to get the entire action put back together and get everything connected so that I can test and see if everything works the way it's supposed to. Now before I carry on with that, I'm going to have to reinstall all of the reeds. Now I realize in hindsight that it would have been a whole lot easier to reinstall the reeds before I put the swells and the mutes back in place. Now while it is going to be a little bit harder getting the reeds reinstalled, it is definitely not impossible. I'm just going to have to lift up the swells and the mutes so that I can get the reeds reinstalled. The only one that is going to be fairly challenging is going to be the sub bass, which is the top one here on the rear of the bass section. So let me go and fetch the reeds and we can get to reinstalling them. Okay, so the stop action is now back in place and connected, and I'm happy to report that all of the stops are working except for these that are not connected yet, like the forte stop here at the bottom, which if I recall correctly opens and closes the rear swell. That still needs to be connected, but all of the rest of them are working. The couplers, bass and treble are working beautifully. I'm pretty happy with how everything looks and how everything works. I'm going to put this off to the side now and get cracking on a couple other things that I still need to get done. So let's go. Okay, so another thing that still needs to be done is I need to put some velvet on the back of this grill. As you might recall, there was a red velvet inside, which is the same red velvet that was on the treadles. So I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm going to put some of the gold velvet that I currently have on the treadles behind this grill, and I think that should look pretty nice. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to get it on here. I'm most probably going to use a contact cement, as I've already seen that the hide glue doesn't do a good job of bonding this particular type of velvet that I have. So let's do it. Okay, so just to test, yesterday I went ahead and I glued a piece of this velvet on a scrap piece of wood using the contact adhesive, just to see if I get a good bond or not. Now, it does seem as if it's fairly strong. Obviously, if I force it, it's going to come off. But I'd say that is a fairly good bond. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this on here, get it clamped up, and move on to something else. Okay, so while the grill is off drying, I realized that I forgot to reinstall the Box Umaa. So I'm going to bring the action back out, install the Box Umaa and connect it, and I may as well go ahead and reconnect that forte stop that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so this is the Box Umaa. It goes over here and it needs to be connected to this stop over here. Now, if I recall correctly, it wasn't connected when I took this thing apart, so I'm going to have to come up with some kind of mechanism to open and close this valve. But before I can do that, I'm going to have to connect the forte stop to this rear swell over here, because once the Box Umaa is installed, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get into this area. Now, this is the piece of material that was used to connect the forte stop. Now, this doesn't look like leather, it looks like some kind of fake leather, probably added at a later stage. Now, I'm not exactly sure how it would have been connected. I do see 3 holes over here, so there was obviously some other kind of mechanism here, but I've decided I'm going to do the same as what was on here. So I just went ahead and I cut a new piece of leather. I punched a hole in the top with a little slit so that it can fit over the mechanism here. Put a tiny hole at the bottom where I'm going to be inserting the screw. Because this wood is very thin, I don't know how well the screw is going to hold up over time, so I'm going to take a bit of hide glue, put it on the tip here just before I screw this in place. So let me install it on the stop side and then we can put on the rest. Okay, so that's installed. Now I just need to screw it on there. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of glue on the end here. Okay, let's give it a test. Perfect. Okay, now for the Box Umaa. Okay, so to connect this Box Umaa to the stop, I found a piece of scrap brass plate, 1.5 millimeters thick, but it is a little bit wider, so it's rectangular. And I sanded it to almost a square, and then I chucked it up in my cordless drill and rounded over the edges to give me something that is fairly round. So I'm going to use this brass rod. I'm going to give it a bend, stick it in the hole over here, and then in this hole over here, and that is going to be my mechanism. So let's see if it works. Then all I need to do is bend over the other ends, and that should be it. Let's give it a test. It works. It works. I'm just going to clip off these ends. I might just take a file and clean up those edges a little bit, but I think that works great. So I've quickly brought the bellows out again because I still need to install the stop for the safety valve at the back here. So I'm going to compress the bellows until where I feel it is max, and then I'm going to put some clamps on so that I can insert either a screw or a nail into the existing hole in the back there. So as you can see in the bottom there is a hole where there was a nail in originally. From the face on the inside to the face on the outside is about 50 millimeters, so I have to add perhaps another 10-15 millimeters to that. So I need something roughly 65 millimeters long. Okay, as luck would have it, obviously I've misplaced the nail that needs to go in there. Tried a couple of different things, screws. This one is way too thick, and I don't want to cause too much chip out over there. The ones that I have that are thin enough are too short. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little piece of brass rod that I have lying around here. I'm going to grind it down into something resembling a nail, which is the right size to fit in there. So let me do that. Okay, I'm going to cut this off a little bit proud of the mark that I made, because I'm still going to drive the nail in a little bit deeper. I'm also going to thin out the rest of the nail so that there's not too much weight at the back, and then I'm going to attempt to roughly pin over the back of this so there's not any sharp edges pushing into this leather. So I'll check back in a minute. Okay, so from this to this. Now I haven't polished it to a mirror finish because I thought leaving it a little bit rough like this would give it a little bit more grip when I knock it into the wood there. But just to be on the safe side, I'm going to dab a little bit of glue on the tip here before I knock it in place. Okay, I think that'll do. Okay, so I really can't think of anything else that I'd like to get done before I jump into final assembly other than the obvious, which is the lost and found part, which still needs to be finished, but as I said, I'll do that off camera. I really wanted to show you guys the reupholstery of the stool, but alas, the stool is not finished at the blasters yet, so I'm probably only going to get that back tomorrow or maybe next week. But perhaps I'll squeeze some of that into the next episode when we do final assembly. And I can't tell you how excited I am for that. So my hope was to get the final assembly done during next week, but there is a possibility that we might be going camping, as here in my country they have started easing up on some of the lockdown measures, so we are allowed to travel out of town. Seeing as my kids have been locked up at home for almost 2 months, we decided we're going to take them on a camping trip. We might be leaving either Wednesday or Thursday, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the full assembly done before that. But if not, you guys as well as myself are just going to have to wait another week. But I guess in the grand scale of time that I've spent on this so far, I guess another week is not the end of the world. So with that being said, if you want to see the final assembly of this, be sure to subscribe, click that bell notification icon so you can get notified when that video drops. And till next time, keep making stuff.